Alright, so welcome back to Dominion Snowline. This is not an official expansion. This is also part 4. So if you haven't watched part 2, part 1, part 2, or part 3, and this is your first one watching, go back and click on part 1. And we're assuming you have watched at least part 1. You don't necessarily have to watch them all in order, but you do have to watch the first one first, where I explain my reasoning for coming up with this expansion and all that. So let's get started. So here we have a split pile here, our second split pile, and we have Cliff, and there's only 5 of these, and you get 2 cards every time you play it, and then you flip the journey token over. So once again, it works with your journey token. It starts face up. If it's face down, discard 2 cards. So every other time you play this, you could potentially discarding the 2 cards after you draw 2 cards. So that's kind of interesting, that sometimes you get 2 cards and sometimes you get 2 cards and discard 2 cards. And then at the start of your next turn, plus 1 card, and you may flip over the journey token over again. So that is kind of cool when you think about it. Let's say, well, the first time you played this, it was face up, so you flip it over, now it's face down, and you're discarding 2 cards, right? Well, at that moment in time, you probably will not want to flip your journey token over. But if, for instance, on the next time you play this card, and assuming you did not flip the journey token over between then, you might want to flip it over. So after you'll get your 2 cards, you'll flip the journey token over. It's face down. It goes back to face up. That means you don't have to discard the 2 cards. Then, at the start of your next turn, you get plus 1 card, and you may flip the journey token over. Now, you don't do the journey token until your next turn, so you'll have to wait until then. Assuming you don't play any other action cards that have the journey token, then on your next turn you could flip it over. You'll get your card, and then hopefully, maybe later, it will work to your benefit. You don't have to keep discarding 2 cards. Maybe. Who knows? It still comes down to just randomness for sure. Unless that's the only one you're playing. Then we've got Climbing Gear that has the journey token. And this one also has the journey token, but instead of that one, which gives you 2 cards, this one's going to give you 2 actions. Then you flip over your journey token, once again, and it starts face up. If your journey token is face up, you get 2 treasure. If it's face down, you get a card. So that's kind of cool. It's like a village every other turn, and every other turn, you get 2 treasure and you get 2 actions. So that's pretty cool. So you get a benefit each time, but it will vary depending on where your journey token is. When you discard other than during a cleanup, you may reveal this and put it into your hand. So, if this gets discarded, let's say you played Cliff earlier, you had to discard 2 cards because of Cliff's effect. You discarded the Climbing Gear as one of those 2 cards. Well, you could reveal it as you discard it and put it back into your hand. So that's pretty cool. That's one way of kind of limiting the amount of cards you're going to discard. That would potentially just make you discard 1 card. So that is actually pretty useful. But remember, if you do that, if you go that route, then you won't get the 2 actions until after you play Cliff, so you're still going to have to find some other way to get actions, for sure. But if you're playing with a lot of action cards that give you plus actions, that shouldn't be an issue. And then you'll get some more actions, and who knows what else you'll get with this as well. So that's another split pile that we have that's, pretty cool. And they kind of work well together too, so that's pretty cool. So let's go over some more as well. Okay. All right, so we have the Hunter's Camp. It gives you 2 actions, and another one that works with your journey token. Flip the journey token over. It starts face up. If it's face up, you get 2 cards. If it's face down, you get 2 treasure. So that's, there's a lot of these that give you these benefits, and so obviously not necessarily need all of these cards that give you tons of the same stuff. But it still gives you 2 cards and 2 treasure. That other one only gave you 1 card and 2 treasure every other turn, right? So 1 card, 1 turn, 2 treasure, another turn. This one at least is giving you 2 cards and 2 treasure. And when you buy this, each other player may gain a silver. So, may. They don't have to, but they have that option. So that's kind of cool. It's interactive because of that. Okay, you know what they say? Let sleeping bears sleep, or let sleeping bears lie. Leave them alone when they're hibernating. And so this is sort of a thematic card. And it's similar to Enchantress from Empires. So an attack duration. It even has a special setup with this card. Add one other duration or reserve card to the supply. So even if you're playing with a lot of other durations and reserve cards, when you're playing with Hibernating Bear, you're still required to add another one of those two types of cards to the supply. It's your choice which you're going to add, but you can add one. You have to add one to the supply, one other. Now, here's what the action does. Until your next turn, the first time each other player plays a non-duration or a non-reserve action card, they get +1 card, +1 action instead of following its instructions, and then discards a card. So, it's a lot more powerful than the Enchantress, because, well, and in some ways, it doesn't affect certain cards. So, Hibernating Bear will not affect other duration cards. So you can play, if you play a non-duration first, then Hibernating Bear will not affect you. If you play a reserve card first, Hibernating Bear will not affect you. So that is something to note, to play one of those two cards first before playing a normal action. Because if you play an action first that isn't one of those two, then you get a card and you get an action, just like you did with Enchantress. However, you also have to discard a card as well. So it's a lot more powerful than Enchantress in that sense. It only hits certain cards, of course, so that helps. So it's not completely too overwhelmingly powerful, and that's why, as the setup, you add one of those two cards, so you have at least an additional option. This ensures that if this was the only card that was a duration or reserve in the game, this would ensure that there would be at least one more. So that is why I did that. And then at the start of your next turn, you get 3 cards. So the benefit is you get 3 cards on your next turn. And it's sort of thematic in a way. Not for the duration effect, but for the reserve part. If you were sitting in your tavern, Matt, drinking some apple cider, hot apple cider, or drinking some coffee, or, a hot chocolate, or something like that, well, you probably wouldn't wake the sleeping bear in the process. But your normal actions could possibly wake up that bear, and he then would attack you. So that is sort of thematic. Maybe not necessarily because he's hibernating, but, it just works with the theme a little bit. Okay, then we have Snowy Owl. Now, do you guys remember Port from Adventures? Well, when you buy a Snowy Owl, you gain a copy of it. Just like with Port, you would buy a Port and you would gain a copy of it. So that's one thing that makes it very similar to that card. But this is also very similar to Lurker from Intrigue, okay? Or the new version of Intrigue, anyway. You get +1 action, choose one, trash an action from the supply, or gain an action from the trash. So that's pretty cool. It's like you still purchase for the 4 to buy it. Lurker was 2, but that's why it's costing 4, because you're getting 2 of these at the same time. So that makes it more useful in that sense. Where Lurker, you pay 2 money, but you'd only get 1, and unless you had an extra buy, that would have to be the case. But this way, you don't have to have an extra buy, because you're going to gain a copy of it if you buy it. And there's just as many of these as there were ports, too. So there's more of these cards in the supply than 10. I think there's 16 of these altogether. So that's pretty cool, I liked it. And that's pretty cool. I liked it a lot. All right, so let's see here. It's almost 10 minutes in. How many more do we have? Well, we still have a few more to go over. Let's maybe go over one more of these and then save the rest for the next. Or let's try to go at least over 1, if not 2. Let's switch these up because that last one's going to take a while to explain. Okay, so we have Eagles. Reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. You may discard 1 revealed card. So then put the rest back in any order. If the discarded card was an action card, so you reveal the top 4 cards, so you can get to look at your cards, and then you get to put the rest back in any order. So it's kind of cool in that regards. But you may discard one in the process, and if you do, you're going to get a benefit for whatever you discarded. And if it has more than one of these, you could gain a lot of stuff. If it's an action card, you get a card, you get 3 actions. If it's a treasure, you get a buy, you get 3 treasure. So even if you were to discard a gold, you're still going to get 3 treasure, and you're also going to get a buy. If it's a victory card, and that's usually what you would discard normally, right? You get 3 cards. If it's a wasteland, wasteland, or curse, for you guys who play with curses, wasteland, you get 2 cards, and you get an action. So you could even discard a wasteland and get a benefit for discarding the wasteland. Now remember Fern Village, it was an action and a wasteland. So you'd get 3 cards and you would get 4 actions. So that's why it might even be considered too powerful for a 6 costing card. It might have to be a 7. But hopefully you won't, get that too often. You won't play this too often where that would happen a lot. Because, it still comes down to you holding on to those Fern Villages and not moving them around to snowshoes or whatever have you. But potentially you could get more stuff, obviously, depending on what the card was that you discarded. So that's kind of cool. Cool aspect. Alright. Then we have Lumberjack. +2 buys, +2 treasure. So kind of like Woodcutter, except you're getting 2 buys instead of 1. Look through your discard pile. You may trash a treasure card from it, and then you put this on your tavern mat. So this one gives you the option to look through your discard pile and trash a treasure card. So that's kind of cool. Gives you an option. You don't have to. And then at the end of your buy phase, if you bought exactly 1 card this turn, you may discard this from your tavern mat. So if you only bought 1 card and didn't use all those nice extra buys that you got, you could get this Lumberjack back pretty easily. But remember, it doesn't give any actions, so it's not extremely useful in that sense. But it could be useful if you want to get rid of a lot of coppers in the beginning of the game, for sure. So that's pretty cool, the Lumberjack. And we'll leave it off for the next video.